We're good.
Great. Hello and welcome everyone to this conversation around mission and creation care hosted by the American Baptist Churches of Massachusetts. I'm the Rev Rebecca Driscoll, the Minister for Creation Care in TABCOM, and I'm here with the Rev Christine Keddy, TABCOM's Director of Missions and Elder Ministry Coordinator. Her home church is First Baptist Jamaica Plain. Previously, she served as Associate Pastor for Family Outreach and Education at the First Baptist Church in Westwood from 2016 to 2019, where she founded the outreach programs Kids in the Kitchen and Kids in the Story. Reverend Christine received her Master of Divinity, magna cum laude, from Bethel Seminary in 2015. She pursued graduate courses in elementary and early childhood education at Bridgewater State College and holds her preschool leader teacher certification with the state of Massachusetts. A passionate lifelong educator, she has been teaching students of all ages from pre-K to seniors her entire adult life in a number of different secular and religious settings. She and her husband, Captain Alan Keddy, live on and enjoy as much time as possible by the ocean on their trimaran sailing vessel called Oasis. Welcome, Christine. It's wonderful to have you here today.
Thank you. I am so excited to be here. This is the first time I've gotten to be the person interviewed. I'm usually doing the interview, so I'm very excited to be here and excited to talk about something that's very dear to my heart.
Great. So that today for us is sustainable fashion. In addition to your work pastoring and teaching and community building, you also own your own business in sustainable fashion. Can you tell us a little bit about that business, what you've named it, and how you got started?
Yes, happy to. My business is named Mrs. Steen's Closet, and Mrs. Steen I was a preschool teacher for 32 years before I became a minister. And a lot of the children couldn't say Miss Christine. And so one of my dear students, Emily Wild, she always used to say, Mrs. Steen. She was from the South and she had this little Southern accent that was so cute. And so everybody started calling me Mrs. Steen. And when I was thinking about a name for the business, I was trying to think of something that no one else would have, because you go on and you think you have this great name, and then you go on and you find out there's other people who have the same great name. And nobody had that name. So that's what I call it, is Mrs. Steen's Closet. And I'm going on my 4th year now, I think, since I started. And it's my sustainable fashion side hustle. And I sell on 4 different platforms online. And I sell upcycled and recycled and thrifted clothing, and also housewares.
So that's a lot to talk about, a lot of interesting things, but you mentioned sustainable fashion, and we call it sustainable fashion for a reason, sort of setting it apart from the world of fast fashion. Can you tell us a little bit about the difference between sustainable fashion and fast fashion, and how the fast fashion industry negatively impacts our environment?
Absolutely. So fast fashion is what we see when we go to the mall for the most part. The stores that sell clothes that is made in large quantities, usually very cheaply made, usually made overseas, often made by workers that are being exploited and underpaid and taken advantage of, and often working in very awful conditions to mass produce this clothing. It's usually made out of not so great quality, and it's actually designed to not last for a long time, because the companies want us in the same consumer mentality that is harming so many of our different facets of the world. They want us to keep wanting more. They want things to go out of style quickly or to wear out quickly, so that we keep having to buy more and more and more. And so that's why it's called fast fashion. And sustainable fashion is something that is designed to last more over the long haul. It's often, but not always, vintage pieces that were made at a time when, first of all, a lot of them were made here in the United States. We no longer have a lot of our clothing manufactured. Were made longer ago, when clothing was made to last longer. And so it's designed that you have these things that are going to last for a longer amount of time. But also when you're done using them, if you do want to flip, let's say you decide, if you're wearing a thrifted wardrobe and you decide, well, I don't really like this outfit anymore, I'm kind of done with it, you can just donate it back and to the thrift store where you bought it and get something else. And the clothing is continually being recycled and reused and put back into the system so that it doesn't end up in a landfill, which people are shocked to find out how much of our discarded and used clothing ends up as trash, but it's a massive amount of stuff that ends up in our landfills. And so by doing this, you're keeping it sort of perpetuating that it's out there and it's being used and it's being worn and it's not ending up as trash.
Yeah, so that segues really nicely into my next question about how sustainable fashion is a better way for us to steward the resources that God has given us and to care for creation. So as you mentioned, trying to keep clothes out of landfills, clothes that might not degrade and become part of the earth sort of in a composting way. Can you talk about other reasons why sustainable fashion is helpful for us in our response to God's call and stewarding the earth well?
Well, for one thing, we're not spending as much money feeding that consumer beast, the beast of corporate greed. We're not doing that. And the organizations that we're buying clothing from are often, usually, I try to always, there are, I should say this at this point, there are different types of organizations that you can buy used clothing from, and some of them are for profit and some of them are not for profit. And so I always try, so company like Savers, for example, is a for-profit company. They're making money just like any other company. So when you're thrifting and buying your clothes at Savers, you're not necessarily, although they do say a portion of their proceeds goes to like the Epilepsy Foundation or whatever, but a majority of their proceeds just goes to their company, as opposed to if you're buying from Salvation Army or St. Vincent de Paul, or what my favorite thrift stores are is the small community thrift stores and church thrift stores. Those are usually supporting various charitable causes. And so when you're going out and spending your money on your clothes, you're actually going out and also supporting, and you can choose whichever cause you want to support. And I did research into that. I looked into, which thrift stores do I want to shop at and which places do I want my money to support? And the ones in the community that were doing the most good and the kind of good that I felt that I wanted to support. And so that's another really, you can feel good when you go and you spend your money knowing that you're helping to support a charitable organization that's doing something good for the community.
Yeah, and then you're not only, getting a new outfit, which is exciting, but you're also supporting other organizations' ministries and caring for the community.
Yep.
So can you say a little bit more about the difference between thrift stores, consignment stores, clothing swaps, online resale, what that all looks like and how you would encourage people? I know you said a little bit about, you can pick your stores and where you buy your clothing based on their own mission and ministry. But how would you encourage people to begin to enter the world of sustainable fashion?
Yeah, it's a lot. And I didn't learn this all at once. It all came gradually. And I will have to be completely honest with you. I did not enter into this with the idea that I was doing something good for the earth. I entered into this from a very personal standpoint of something that had happened, a tragedy that had happened in my family. And so I didn't have an altruistic motive. That kind of came later when I was like, oh, there's a whole branch of this that helps the earth and helps mission organizations and all this kind of stuff. So a consignment store, which you asked about, is a place where usually it's a small shop, although there are some online ones. ThreadUp is one of the major ones that you may know of that it operates online, where you bring your clothing that is no longer wanted and the store sells it for you and splits the profits with you. So if you have some clothing that, and usually those are for more high-end designer type items. Most consignment stores have sort of a threshold of what they will accept, and they really want very much more high-end items that they can get a lot of money from, and then you split it. Most of them have like either a 50-50 split or a 60-40 split. And again, different ones may have different missions and different goals, and so you really just want to do your research before you bring your clothing somewhere to have it sold. Thrift stores, as I said, generally tend to be more egalitarian. Everything is accepted. It doesn't have to be super high end. You can find everything from clothes that's made from Walmart to super high end designers. And that is more of, you have to really kind of sift when you're looking for things, because some things you might find there that are not that great. But then the really cool thing about it is you find these gems in the middle of and that's for me what's really fun too, is the treasure hunt of you never know what you're going to find when you go out thrifting that day. You don't know what you're going to find. And it's really exciting for me to hunt through and find things that someone has cast off, and that I can find a new home for that item and find somebody to love it. So let's see, you asked me about consignment stores, thrift stores. I mentioned sort of the for-profit ones, which is like Savers.
What about clothing swaps?
Oh, clothing swaps, great. So that is not something I've been super involved with, and this is something that I would definitely like to do more of and get more into. But I follow a bunch of different resellers, and I'm in a bunch of different groups on Facebook and Instagram, and some of them have organized these clothing swaps. So everyone bring, you find a group of people, whether it's people in your church or people at the community center or your women's group or whatever your group is. And you have the announcement that, on this day at this time, you're going to bring your items to swap. And based upon how many items you bring, that's how many items you take. So let's say I bring 10 items that I want to swap. I can pick 10 items from other people's items. And it's a great way, nobody's spending any money. And again, the clothes is not going to end up in the landfill, because people also don't realize too that when you donate clothes, those places where you donate to have so much of a surplus of clothing that still they don't sell. And that stuff ends up in the landfill. So I've actually sat out behind Salvation Army and Goodwill and watched as stuff is just being thrown into the dumpster because it's stuff that hasn't sold. They've had it out on the shelf for a certain amount of time and they have to get rid of it, and they're throwing it into the dumpster. So we don't even, we can't even imagine how much stuff ends up as trash, because our society is just, people have so much and so much more than what they need, that we just we can't even conceive of the amount of things that get thrown away.
Yeah, and then that gap between people who have too much and people who don't have enough, but still all of these clothes end up in the trash.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the things I found out when I started to do this, that some of there's a bit of a I don't know what the word I want to use, animosity, I guess, if you will, towards resellers. Some people think that, so I'm going to shop and I'm shopping that day at Goodwill, and I'm not somebody who can't afford to go to a regular store. So some people actually believe that by me shopping in Goodwill, I'm taking clothes off the rack that somebody who's economically disadvantaged, I'm taking clothes away from them. I'm buying clothes there and they could be buying those clothes. And so there's this misunderstanding that the truth is there's more than enough for everybody. That, there's, at the end of the day, that Goodwill is still going to throw a ton of stuff in the trash, even with, no matter who's shopping there, whether you're disadvantaged economically or not, there's still going to be things in the trash. So there's enough for everybody. And everyone who's shopping in a sustainable way is helping to keep those things from going in the trash.
Yeah. And you were saying it's sort of like a treasure hunt when you go.
Right.
And you look for different pieces. Do you have a story that sticks out in your mind about a particular find of yours that maybe was one of your favorites or was more particularly unique?
I found a Fender Stratocaster guitar at a yard sale.
Ooh.
Anybody that knows anything about guitars, and I bought it for $10 at a yard sale, and I was able to sell it on eBay for close to $1,000.
Wow.
And it was a beautiful guitar. I actually went and brought it. It wasn't strung, so I went and brought it to the guitar shop. I did put some money into it to get it restored. It was about $100 of my own investment to get it up to snuff to sell. But even after that investment, I still made close to $1,000 selling the guitar. Yeah. And I find goodies like that all the time, not to that degree, but things that people don't realize, hey, this is valuable, especially vintage stuff. You really have to do a lot of research with vintage, and people just have no idea of things that they think, this is junk, and it's like, no, somebody's for that. So the teens are really into the vintage nowadays, the young folks, the teens and 20s. And so the clothing that we wore in the 80s and 90s is now being worn by the kids, and they love it, and they will pay good money for that stuff.
Which is exciting to see the cycles of fashion come around.
Everything comes back in style eventually.
Yeah.
Everything does. Yeah. So I have two little factoids that I just wanted to share with you about on the line of sustainable fashion and how it helps. And one of them is, this comes from the site of ThreadUp, which is, as I mentioned, the biggest online consignment store. And it says, choosing a used item over a new reduces your carbon footprint by 82%.
Yeah.
And, it's just more fun to me to shop that way. You're leaving the store with something that nobody else is going to have. Let's say you're looking for an outfit, you're invited to a wedding. There's a good chance that if you go out to Macy's and buy a dress, there's a very good chance that someone else at that wedding is going to be wearing your dress. And we all know that feeling when you walk into a fancy event and you realize that somebody else has the same outfit on that you do.
Yep.
And when you're shopping at a in a thrift store, and you find a really cool vintage dress, you're going to be the only person with that outfit. And not only can you find the dress, but you can accessorize it with vintage accessories. So like, for example, everything I'm wearing right now today is either vintage or handmade, with the exception of my pendant, which is my I got this when I was on St. John, my island, the last time I was there. But my beads are handmade by a favorite artisan of mine, who's actually a dear friend of mine that I've known since we lived in the Virgin Islands. And my shirt and my sweater are both thrifted. Earrings are made by a local artisan. I'm also I'm really big on supporting local artisans.
Well, that's part of the reselling industry too, is that you can support more local businesses and the local community instead of buying from global companies that are anonymous to us, we can support our friends, our family, our community members, because they're usually smaller family-owned businesses, thrift
Right.
stores, or if they're
and often
consignment.
church-owned thrift stores.
Yeah.
Many churches
Yeah.
have that as part of their ministry and mission. And those actually are my favorite thrift stores to shop in, because first off, the ladies that volunteer in those thrift stores, they are always awesome. And and I love just going and visiting with the volunteers in the thrift stores. But also just, you know that you're supporting that ministry of the church. And so, yeah, it's really neat. There's actually a thrift store at one of the churches here. My husband and I just recently moved to Rhode Island, and they have a clothing ministry, and they don't charge for any of their items. They have a thrift store. It's set up just like a regular thrift shop. And the first day I went in there and I was like, oh, how much are your items? I don't see prices on anything. And they said, we don't charge.
Yeah. It's a beautiful way to do ministry and to be settled and invested in your community.
And they have, what happened, it's not anonymous either. If you shop there, you have to fill out a card with your name and your birthday. And they ask your birthday because I think they send you a card on your birthday. And every time you come in, they write down the date that you visited and how many items. You're allowed 20 items a month is what everybody's allowed to take. But like when the war started in Ukraine, I'll tell you a story about that really quickly. There was a local organization that was doing a drive to collect clothing and personal care items and medicines and things to send over to the folks in Ukraine. And so I went into the thrift store thinking, I'm just going to get stuff from the thrift store and bring it to this Ukrainian clothing drive that was happening the next day. And so I went in and I said, I'm here and I'm just going to tell you right now, I'm going to take a lot of items today, but I'm not keeping them for myself. I'm going to bring them to the clothing drive. And they were like, oh, the one that's happening at Cardi's, we're packing up boxes for that right now. Take as much as you want.
Oh, wow.
And so I walked out of there with like 3 garbage bags full of clothing that I ended up bringing the next day to the donation site for Ukraine. So yeah, it's I didn't understand this whole, when I got into it, I didn't understand the whole aspect of this that applies to ministry. For example, during the pandemic, a lot of our thrift stores closed because everything was shut down. And I ended up putting an ad, just a plea on the local Facebook page, community Facebook page. And I said, I'm a local businesswoman. I have this small business. And I know that the thrift stores are shut down right now. So I have no way of getting inventory. And people had nowhere to donate items either. There was nowhere people could donate because the thrift stores were not accepting donations. But right. I knew of a couple of churches that still were accepting donations. So I said in my ad that if people wanted, if they had clothing to donate, I would come to their house, I would pick up the clothing, I would keep a few of the items to use and sell in my business, but the bulk of their items would be donated to various different mission causes that I knew that were going on in the church. And I was barraged with people. And what I found out was 3 of the people, now this has happened 3 times now since I've started this, where I had folks that, one was a husband, a woman who had just lost her husband. One was a man who just lost his mother to cancer. And they had their loved ones' items, clothing and things. And they hadn't been able to donate them because they felt they weren't ready to do that. And they didn't want to just dump them somewhere, some anonymous place in a dumpster or drop off. But when they saw that it was me, and they saw that I was a minister, and they saw that I had colleagues and friends that were looking for donations for various different things, somehow they felt safe and comfortable donating the items to me. And so I ended up going to pick up the items. Of course, I was masked and socially distant and doing precautions and all that stuff. But I ended up standing out in the driveway of these people's houses and ministering to them. You know, they were telling me about their loved one whose clothing they were giving me and crying as they were telling me about this person. And I was promising them, you know, I will make sure that this is used in a good way and that this, you know, will go to people that really need it. And it's not going to end up in the trash. And one of the things like the guy whose mother had passed, she had died of cancer, and he had this shawl that someone had knitted for her when she was getting chemo at Dana-Farber. And I was able to pass that on to a colleague that was in the process of having chemo at Dana-Farber. And I was able to say to this person, you know, this came to me, this was donated, and it was worn by this woman, and she was this man's mother, and now I'm passing this on to you that you can wear when you get your chemo treatments. And so people, and I was able to tell him that story. I followed up with him and said, this is where your mother's shawl ended up. And that's a very different experience for people than just pulling up to some anonymous donation site and dumping their loved one's stuff with a stranger.
Right. Absolutely. It's almost as if things come full circle.
Yeah, it's turned into a ministry, and I had not intended that to happen, but yeah.
But there are callings that God has on our hearts and in our ministry that come to fruition in surprising and unexpected ways, but are such a gift. So
yeah,
it's wonderful to hear your stories and to see how something like our clothing, our fashion choices have such an impact on our relationships and our communities and our faith life. So I have one other question for you, because I thought this was really fun. When you shared this with me a couple of months ago, you had upcycled some of your pieces. And so for Valentine's Day, you had painted some pants and put hearts on them. Can you say a little bit about upcycling and how that fits into your business and the idea of sustainable fashion, how we can wear our clothing or alter our clothing
to
have it last longer?
Yeah, that's another thing. So that kind of started with, I had found a few pieces thrifting that were either they had a stain or they had a rip or there was something wrong with them. And, you know, people generally don't want to buy something at the thrift store if it's stained or ripped. And so, you know, that's going to end up in the trash. But it was, you know, a nice piece. And I thought, you know, what could I do to like save this so it didn't go in the trash? So one of them, for example, was a blazer. It's beautiful, vintage wool, red wool blazer, lined, gorgeous, made in the USA, still had the Union label inside of it. That's how you know something is really good vintage, if it has the Union label. You probably don't remember, you're too young, but there used to be this commercial. So always look for the Union label. Anyway, and I was like, oh, this is going to end up in the trash. And I bought it at the thrift store that day, and I brought it home, and I was like, what could I do to fix this? Because there was a rip, and I thought, I had this jar of old buttons. And I thought, ooh, I could sew these buttons. They were colorful and they were all mismatched and funky. And so I was like, ooh, I could sew these buttons on over the hole and you wouldn't see the hole. And I ended up just sort of bedazzling this blazer with these colorful buttons. And that was an upcycle. And I ended up being able to turn around and sell it. And the person who bought it got something that was completely unique, that and that blazer didn't end up in the trash. I've bought different t-shirts, tablecloths are really good for this, curtains, you know, some of the old vintage patterns that you just can't find anymore, these beautiful fabrics. And you might see a curtain or a tablecloth in the thrift store and it has a stain on part of it or a hole in part of it, but you can use the rest of that fabric. And I've done quilting designs. So I took a denim jacket and I took this floral fabric that came from a tablecloth and I cut out flowers out of this floral fabric. and I sewed them onto the back of the jean jacket. And so now you have this, quilted jean jacket with these quilted flowers on the back of it. And I blinged it all up on the front with colorful buttons, and you can get iron-on patches that are really fun at the fabric store. But I try not to buy anything to upcycle my items. I try to use things that I've found and things that are going to get thrown away rather than buying more stuff. And it's been a really fun creative outlet. I've had dresses that have a stain on them, but they're still a beautiful dress. And so I painted a flower over the stain with fabric paint. And now the dress is not going to go in the trash, and somebody's going to get an individually crafted item. And so that's upcycling. There's lots of, if you go on Instagram and you search the hashtag upcycle, you will see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different examples of ways to upcycle fabrics. I started to just recently do mosaics with broken pottery, broken china, and and that was an accident again. I had bought this great mug at the thrift store, and as I was getting it into my car, it fell in the parking lot and smashed.
Oh no.
And I was so upset. And then I was like, I wonder what I can do with this broken mug. And I Googled broken pottery upcycle and found out you can make mosaics out of it. And so nowadays with Google, you can just Google anything. And pretty much there's a YouTube video that will teach you how to do whatever you want to do, which is really cool. So a lot of this stuff, I just Googled how to do it and learned from somebody else, copied their idea.
Yeah. So the gift also of talent and time in teaching others how to upcycle and how to create a longer life for housewares and clothing. And then it just brings a little bit more joy to our lives, right? Because we could take that mosaic and hang it in the kitchen or the bedroom, or, that dress could be extra special for that special event, that unique moment. It shares a little bit of love. I know I think it's a Netflix series that talks about the stories of clothes and different life.
I've seen it. Yeah.
Lives that clothes have and in the possession of different people. And that's always a really neat thing to think about, like how many lives has this particular dress had, right? And how many people have loved it. And
I do that with books too. I should also say I've just started getting into vintage books and reselling vintage books, which that also, so many old books get thrown in the trash. Yeah. And there are so many ways. We could do a whole show about old books and different ways that you can use old books. But I love it. And I especially love it when you get an old book that has an inscription inside of it. And, you think, as I'm reading these books, I think, somebody else was holding this in their hand and somebody else was being educated or inspired by reading this book. And how many folks has this book been in the hands of, and how many people has this book inspired? And it's just really cool.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Reverend Christine, for your time today in talking to us about sustainable fashion and all the different ways that it can weave itself into our lives and that we can engage with it. Do you have any last things
I should just
for
say
us
that,
to reflect on as we close out our
maybe we even want to do a second episode of this just to talk about churches and different ways that churches, we mentioned a lot of things in the context of this conversation anyway. Right. Churches can start a thrift store ministry. Churches can start a clothing swap ministry. Churches can start all these kinds of things. But, if there's people that are interested after hearing this conversation or watching this, and they are from our churches and they would like to know more about how to start a ministry like that, you and I are equipped to help them and to coach them.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, it's both a ministry, a mission moment, and a moment to care for God's creation and our earth. And like you mentioned, it's our carbon footprints, it's how much goes in the garbage, it's saving on water, and human labor and the abuse of power. So it touches many different social justice concerns.
Yep. Yep. So if people want to contact me, I am Keddy at tabcom.org, KEDDY at tabcom, TABCOM.org. And I have contact with Rebecca, and we can help you coach your church in how to start a ministry like this for sustainability and for creation care and for mission. So if there's anyone in the sound of our voices that would like more information or would, feels like this is something they would like to start in their church, we didn't even talk about the whole, the church can have a site, can become a site for one of these donation places, and
Right.
that can help the church earn some money. We didn't really get to touch on that stuff. So
there's such a variety of ways that congregations can become involved in this ministry for the betterment of the community and the congregation.
Exactly. So thank you, Rebecca, for having this conversation today, and for being in your ministry and creation care with TABCOM. It's such an important ministry, and I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to share a little bit today about a passion of mine.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your passion, your experience, and your wisdom around sustainable fashion, Christine. It's such a blessing to have this conversation with you.
Same here.